How to Survive Camping. Rule number 4. The Dancers. Written by user Phantom Goat. Submitted to the No Sleep subreddit. I run a private campsite. Every morning, I take a four-wheeler out and circle the grounds before most people are awake. There are some benefits to being an early riser. Solitude, seeing the sun rise, finding the human torso lying in the middle of the road before anyone else. Yes, the torso. Just the torso. This was back before smartphones. I was 21. I had been in my last year of college, finishing up a business degree with a minor in horticulture. The campground was staffed in part by my extended family, but its ownership passed only to direct descendants. My life was planned out from birth, and so my degree choice was deliberate. I believe my parents would have supported whatever I chose to major in, so long as I took ownership of the campground. But I've loved this place my whole life and wanted to prepare myself to be the best steward I could be. It was the start of the spring semester when my mother forgot to close a window. My father woke in the middle of the night to find the little girl sitting in the mangled ruins of my mother's abdomen. Enraged, he seized the girl by her hair and dragged her out to the back door and into the yard. She shrieked and pleaded, but he couldn't be swayed. He threw her to the beast, and after he was finished with her, it turned on him. The police found his hand. That was all they found. I know this is what happened because I dreamed of it. It was a true dream. If you ever had a true dream, you know they feel different, and you know you can trust them. I never finished college. I regret that some days. I don't need a degree to do my job, but I think it would have been nice to have. There's an empty spot on my office wall. My parents had cleared it before they died so they could hang my diploma there in preparations for when I took over management. I can't bring myself to put anything else up in its place. I was well prepared to take ownership of the camp despite my age. I've been training for it my whole life, after all, and I had my entire extended family to help me. So, when I found part of a body in the road, I knew what to do. My flip phone's coverage was limited, and I couldn't make calls while under the canopy of the trees. Instead, I carried a digital camera and took photos from all the important angles that the police would be interested in. Then I took out the large black trash bag from the back of the four-wheeler and edged the body in. I tied it shut, put another bag around it, and tied it again. And then I hoisted it onto the back of the vehicle and strapped it down. The blood was fresh enough that I could wash it off into the dirt with the couple of gallons of water I carried for the specific purpose. Now, I understand that some of you may be astonished that I would clean up the scene of a violent death without first contacting the police. However, my family has understanding with the police. The campground is important around here. It brings a lot of people in, and during the peak of the summer, we double the country's population. They spend a lot of money on local businesses. A lot of money. The police don't mind if we take certain liberties to ensure the normal operations of the campsite isn't disrupted. It would be upsetting to campers if they came across a dismembered body or an active police scene. I called the police as soon as I was back at the house, and then I started calling my family members. I'd only found the torso, after all. That meant there were two legs, two arms, and a head yet to be found, and I had no idea how many pieces those parts were in. While my extended family scoured the woods, for the remaining bits. I could deal with the police. Officer Thomas responded. He'd been helping with our campsite difficulties since before I was born. He's close to retirement now. He sat in my office and he looked through the photos I had taken on my computer, then requested to see the body out in the backyard. I pulled it off the four-wheeler and cut the plastic open. Mercifully, the body was still fresh, that it hadn't started to smell of decay, just the sour, meaty smell of early death. Officer Thomas inspected the severed sockets, picking at the edges of flesh and muscle delicately with his fingers, before sitting back on his haunches and stripping off his stained latex gloves. This is different than the other cases, he finally said. I blinked, taken aback and suddenly feeling woeful, inadequate to the challenges of my family's campsite. I'd known that this could have happened someday, that I'd be the one to deal with something new moving in, but it was a distant sort of knowledge, the sort that you decide to handle some other day and live in blissful ignorance until that time comes. Still writing a will. We all know we should, but that's a problem we regulate for the future and try to ignore its specter in our present lives. Thomas explained that the limbs were severed methodically when we were dealing with a wild animal, whether natural or otherwise. The bodies would be haphazardly torn apart. There'd be additional injuries of teeth and claw marks. The torso was otherwise untouched. There wasn't even bruising. This indicated that the victim hadn't even been restrained, at least not by methods or left marks. The police might not be able to tell us what we were dealing with, but they could help narrow the possibilities. Thomas had brought the police van, so he put the body into a bag and tossed it in the back for transport to the morgue. He asked that we bring the other parts by once we found them, and they'd start trying to identify the victim. I would also check in with the other campers to find out if someone was missing, and perhaps any information about what they'd done, where they'd gone, what they've done, or where'd they gone. Then Thomas would come back with some paperwork about a wild animal attack, and that'd be it. We'd lose some campers, of course, once the rumor started to spread. That was unavoidable. Business would be slow for the next year, but it would bounce back once people began to forget that urgent sense of danger and slip back into complacency. We hadn't formally acknowledged that this was an old land yet. The rules wouldn't come until later, when we had too many creatures that were intelligent or powerful enough to elude our attempts at removal. We found all the body parts by midday. They'd been left deliberately, placed so that someone actively searching for them could find them, but the casual passerby was unlikely to notice. My cousin found the head. She called for me on the walkie-talkie, asking that I come look. She sounded deeply shaken. My cousin is 2 years older than me. I was quickly finding that the camp manager title conveyed the perception that I was better equipped to handle anything, no matter how horrific. The head was placed on a stake in the center of a narrow clearing. The ground was spongy, as it sat in a depression that collected water every time it rained. 4 more stakes were stabbed into the earth, a circle around it. I pulled out my compass and checked their orientation. They sat askew from the cardinal directions. I frowned. This was a deliberate perversion. Look, my cousin whispered, pointing at the head on the stake. He's still alive. I edged closer, peering at the head. My skin crawled, and I felt goosebumps break out on my arms as I crossed the perimeter of the circle. A middle-aged man, perhaps in his 40s. His jaw was missing, leaving behind the upper row of teeth, and his eyes were wide with silent suffering. He blinked. I swore and stumbled backwards, rounded on my cousin, and told her to leave, to go take a break and recover her composure, and then start going around and asking camps if all their members were accounted for. I'd take care of it from here. Perhaps watching my parents die, a silent observer in a dream that felt like reality, had prepared me to withstand this sort of horror. I confess that it angers me to see someone die in a manner that no one should have had to endure. But I've long since accepted that this is life. My world no longer has room for the blissful illusion that humanity has no predators. I told the man on the stake that it would be okay, that I would put an end to this, and he'd finally, mercifully, die. A couple of tears ran down his cheek, and I saw relief in his eyes. Then I went to the stakes and pulled them free from the ground. After I wrenched the last from the earth, I stood and watched the man's face. His eyes remained open, long past when he should have blinked, and I was satisfied that whatever practice bound him here had been disrupted. The air felt different as well, lighter. It no longer pressed in on me. I left the remaining detective work of identifying the victim to the police and the rest of the staff. I locked myself in my office. It was still odd, thinking of it as mine. The marks of my parents were strewn everywhere, and I moved slowly in replacing their presence with my own. The books on folklore and camp management were worn, the bindings broken, the pages crumpled and smudged. I wondered how many times my father or mother had leafed through these, searching for answers. Folklore is not a tidy thing. Monsters and creatures of power don't fall neatly into categories. It's not so different from the natural world in this regard. We can look at a bird and know it's a bird, but what kind of bird is it? Bird of prey, or water bird, or woodpecker, or pigeon, or any of the many, many other types? Similarly, am I dealing with spirits of a demon, or a fairy, something that falls into that gray area in between? And even if I could narrow it down, there are still variations within a category. If we're dealing with an incubus, is it one of the classical sense, or is it the kind that attaches only to one person for life, or is it the kind with chicken legs from the knee down? Yes, chicken-footed incubi are a thing. No, we haven't had to deal with them yet on this campsite. I decide to try a couple things. The used practices made me feel suspect fairies, but the perversion of it also made me think spirits. I gathered up some deterrents from the shed and iron shackles, hawthorn, branches, stones with a hole in them, that sort of thing. Then I went about the campsite and left them in strategic areas, mostly at crossroads and along the edge of the designated camping areas. I eared. We were used to dealing with brute creatures that could be driven off, captured, or killed. I don't regret my attempt. It is my responsibility to keep my campers safe. However, I am far more cautious now when I try to drive off something that is intelligent. They recognize these attempts for what they are and take offense at such aggression. That night, I was awoken by the sound of someone's voice outside my bedroom window. I'd at least cleared out the master bedroom and made it my own, for my childhood bedroom had been turned into a study after I left for college. I didn't catch the words, for I came to awareness at the end of the conversation. Someone was talking to the little girl that cries outside my window. That made me sit up straight in my bed. Who or what would talk to that little girl? Her weeping stopped. There was the soft sound of her feet running in the grass, away from the house. Someone or something had sent the girl away. My heart began to hammer in my chest, and I quietly slipped out of bed, thinking of the shotgun I kept in the bedroom, wondering if it'd do anything at all. Then my house shook as something slammed against the front door and my back door in unison. A pause, another impact that rattled the doors and their frames, a third, final impact, and the crack and crash of both doors being torn off their hinges. I stumbled out of bed, blind with fear, thinking of how my father died, how he clawed with his bare hands at the beast's face as he could fight it off, even as its teeth severed his body into two. My hands closed over the shotgun stock as footsteps echoed down the hallway. I stood, turned, and there was a hand against the shotgun's barrel, pushing it up and away, and another palm against my cheek.
That's enough.
A female voice said. She sounded amused. I couldn't see her face in the darkness of the bedroom.
How about you go for a walk with us?
I don't remember much after that. I left the house, and I think I told them I couldn't. Not without the beast coming for me, and she laughed. And she said they sent it away. I'm not sure how many others were with us. Only the woman spoke to me. We walked into the forest, and I'm not certain of the route we took, for it comes and goes, as if I was slipping in and out of sleep. When my awareness returned, I found myself standing beside a lit campfire, and among a ring of people around it. The ground around me was packed earth. The woman moved from person to person, a ceramic pitcher in her arms. She slipped a cupped hand inside and came up with a handful of water, which she dribbled on the brow of the person before her. Something felt wrong about this practice, unsettling. I tried to move or speak, but I found my body was slow to respond to my desires. Finally, she stopped in front of me.
Why don't you join us?
She murmured, pouring the water on my brow. It ran down my face and neck, and it in some of my neckline of my nightgown. It felt gritty, and it tasted like salt. When a drop touched the edge of my lip. They began to dance, and I was compelled to join them. Step, turn, stretch your hands to the night sky. Spine arched, twist and bend, touch the ground, then up, a hop, and the music quickened. And I saw, as we spun, but the music came from a hunched group at the edge of the light, a violin, a hand drum, and something that reminded me of a flute. We danced. My legs began to ache, my breathing grew labored. Bright pains stabbed through my feet and ankles, and I thought, madly, that I felt liquid against my bare feet with every step. Still, the dancers continued, their movement growing more aggressive, more frenzied, and I wept and pleaded in broken, panicked fragments for them to release me. They did not. I collapsed before the music stopped. My chest heaved in spastic gasps, racking my entire body with convulsions as it instinctively tried to bring in more oxygen to my battered body. My feet burned, pain shooting up my legs with every beat of my heart. I lay there, writhing in the dirt, whimpering and openly weeping. The dancers clustered around my prone form. One of them crouched, and I felt fingers in my hair, close to the roots, and she lifted my head from the ground so that I was able to see her, so that I was forced to look up at her. The firelight was to her back, and I could only see her chin and lips in the flickering light.
The little girl and the beast have laid claim to your life.
She said, and she smiled, her white teeth shining in the darkness.
None of us will contest their right. However, there is still so much we can do to you before you succumb.
She leaned in close, and I felt her breath against my ear, her body smelling of earth and plants.
Don't try to drive us off again.
She whispered. She released me, and as a group, the dancers and the musicians turned and walked away. I'm not sure how long I lay there, shuddering on the ground. It was one of my senior campers that found me. I heard his footsteps approaching at a run, and then he hit the ground next to me, turning me over onto my back. A flashlight shone in my face, and I squeezed my eyes shut tight. "Oh, thank God," he breathed. "You're alive." He didn't recognize me. That's not uncommon. I don't socialize with the campers much. I was able to tell him not to call 911, that I was the camp manager, and I just wanted to go back to my house and rest. I could take care of myself from there, or call my aunt to come help. He disposed of me on the sofa in the living room and remained at my house until my aunt arrived. At one point, he asked me what had happened. "The dancers," I said weakly. "The dancers found me." His attention focused on that, and he asked a few questions. Specific questions. "Weird," he finally said, convinced we'd encountered the same people. "I danced with them a few nights ago. I don't think I've ever felt so happy in my life." Even in my exhausted state, his words triggered a memory of something I had read. Dancing is used as a cure for supernatural afflictions. The sick individual is sat down in the middle of a circle, and the dancers move around them, thereby banishing their illnesses. Yet something felt wrong about their practice, from the off-center placement of the stakes to the mockery of ointment. Were they a group of dancers that had been cursed? Were they demons enacting their own abhorrent version of the same practice? Without being certain, I didn't dare try to drive them off again. However, I at least wanted to understand the difference in why one person had survived and another had not. I could convey it to my campers somehow. I had not yet written my rules, but I had a vague idea that perhaps I could inform them so that they could know of the hazards at least. We already spray painted the poison ivy patches fluorescent pink. Telling people to stay away from the dancers wouldn't be too dissimilar in theory. When the wounds on my feet were healed enough that I could walk, I went out into the forest after the sun had set. I wasn't concerned about the beast. It stayed close to the little girl, and the little girl never went into the forest. I drove about on my four-wheeler, searching for campfires. There were many, but the later it got, the fewer remained to check. Finally, sometime after midnight, I found the dancers. They moved in a slow, sinuous circle. Their movements were languid, the music slow. The shadows stretched out into the darkness beyond the orange glow of the campfire. I killed the engine and walked down there through the thin line of trees to the clearing. The music stopped as I approached. The dancers turned to stare at me, and while I couldn't see their faces, I felt their hostility. The woman stepped out to meet me. She was short, I noticed, not even my height. She stood out from among the other dancers, tall and lean, and I wondered if there was a reason for that, or if it was a mere coincidence.
You should go.
She said evenly.
You aren't welcome.
I figured as much, I replied. I'm not ready to leave yet, though. Her hand snapped up. She grabbed me by the neck, raising her arm, her fingers digging into my tendons.
What are you trying to do here?
She hissed. Finding out what prompts you to kill people. Her eyes went wide. She stared at me incredulously for a moment, and then let go of my neck. I stumbled backwards, coughing. She laughed, a high, delicate sound like the chimes of a bell.
You take advantage of your immunity from death.
She said in amusement.
I like your boldness. I will tell you. Knowing what displeases us won't be enough to keep us from resisting the temptations of joining her in our dance.
They had to be welcomed, she said, permitted to join. She did not elaborate on what sort of person they would welcome and who they would reject. There wasn't any sort of criteria, she said with a shrug. They just knew who they liked. As for the other offense, that would merit someone's death. She directed me to look at the musicians. I did. They raised their heads and looked back at me. My next memory is of being on my knees, my fingernails stained of blood, the skin around my eyes and down my cheeks burning from what I had clawed at raw. The dancers were gone, and mercifully, they had taken the musicians as well. I don't leave the safety of my campers entirely up to themselves. I do what I can. Sometimes I take risks, and sometimes I suffer for them. This is my responsibility as the camp manager. We do the hard and dangerous work to make sure you have a pleasant and safe camping experience. The least you can do is follow the directions that I suffered to obtain. Rule number 4. If you see a group of people dancing in a circle around a fire, you may join them. If they welcome you in, dance with them until the music ends. Do not look at the musicians. If they do not welcome you, but instead stop and stare, back away slowly and then leave. If they follow you, you can try to run, but it's likely already too late. Pray that death comes swiftly.